I'm going to share with you the number one exploit to crush 1-2 live, no limit, hold'em cash games. Currently, today, live cash games are super duper soft and very beatable if you use fundamentally sound strategies and you adjust, sometimes drastically, to take advantage of the mistakes your opponents make. I have a bunch of students at PokerCoaching.com who are grinding it out at 1-2, 1-3, 2-5, and they are crushing it because the games are overly soft. And I want you to do that too if you are not already crushing your opponents. A lot of small stakes players are going to make all sorts of blunders. Some are too loose, some are too tight, some are too weak, some continuation bet every time, some never continuation bet. So you need to pay attention to each player's tendencies. That said, almost all small stakes players make one major mistake that is actually very easy to exploit. Do you know what it is? Take a second, think about it. Write in the comments section down below what you think this exploit is. You ready for me to reveal it? Drum roll. The number one exploit is that most players do not bluff often enough. So you should drastically overfold to aggression. When a medium amount or a lot of money goes into the pot, your opponents will be heavily weighted towards value hands. They will very often find the logical bluffs like straight draws and flush draws, but they will not find the junky bluffs like king high with a junky backdoor gut shot straight draw. So when they bet, their range is stronger than it should be. And when a range contains too many value hands, all bluff catchers fold, especially those that will have a difficult time improving to a strong hand on a later betting round. When your opponents put in a lot of money, it's very often because they think they win. And if they think they win, bluff catching is not such a good idea. So let's talk about some pre-flop exploits and some post-flop exploits. When they raise, when they make the initial raise, quite often people are playing reasonable ranges. But when they 3-bet, when they re-raise, most players' ranges contain too few bluffs. So if the range contains too few bluffs, it forces you to overfold, fold more often than you would if your opponents played well, especially with offsuit hands that are likely to be dominated by their 3-betting range. Also, this may force you to under-bluff if they'll not fold to a 4-bet compared to the game theory optimal strategy. If they raise and you 3-bet, if they 4-bet, you're going to find this almost always the nuts, like pocket queens and better and ace king, unless your opponent is insane. So fold a ton. Just consider your games, right? There's almost no pre-flop 4-betting in almost all small stakes games. So when they do 4-bet, you really got to get out of the way. Let's take a look at some game theory optimal ranges, and we'll discuss how to adjust them to account for the fact that your opponents are probably tighter than they should be. Let's take a look at this chart first. Here we have the low jack versus a hijack 3-bet. So we raise the low jack seat. That is first to act 6-handed. These charts are for 100 big blind cash games. And then the hijack re-raises. The hands in red, re-raised, green calls, blue folds, gray we would have folded before the flop. So notice the hands in green that are calling. Ace-10 suited, king-queen suited, jack-10 suited, 10-9 suited, small and medium pairs. Notice this range is already super duper tight. Like pocket nines actually just folds a decent chunk of the time. Because the game theory optimal 3-betting range from the hijack is already pretty strong. If your opponent's even tighter than they should be because they don't bluff with some perhaps junky suited aces or whatever bluffs they decide to find. If their range is literally aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace king, well, ace queen suited goes way down in value. Ace jack suited's garbage. Ace 10 suited's garbage. King queen suited's garbage. Jack 10 suited's garbage. All these hands are garbage. This is even more true as your opponent re-raises to a larger size. Say you are playing cash games and you make it 3 big blinds and they make it 12 out of their 100 big blind stack. It's not a great spot. Suited connectors are just toast. They need to mostly fold. You can still set mine with pairs because if your opponent is too tight, they'll usually stack off too frequently post-flop because they have aces, kings, and queens a lot, right? So you should probably call with all the pairs, but the offsuit hands like ace, queen, king, queen, ace, jack are just garbage even against a game theory optimal player, so they're really garbage against a tight player. I mean, consider, if you raise ace, queen, and get 3-bet, are you folding it to the 3-bet? Most people don't. And they are leaking money, especially against players who 3-bet too tightly. What about cutoff against the button 3-bet? So we raise the cutoff, the button 3-bets. Now, we do need to defend wider in Game Theory Optimal World. You see now we are raising wider, but also defending with many more hands. That's because the button's 3-betting range should be far looser than the hijack's 3-betting range, right? That said, notice marginal suited connected hands, suited gappers, some suited aces, some suited kings. Every offsuit hand besides ace king and ace queen simply fold. Offsuit hands are garbage. I cannot say it any more clearly. Offsuit hands are garbage. And against a tight 3-betting strategy, you should probably fold out almost all the suited aces besides maybe like ace jack suited and better. Ace 10 and ace 9 should definitely get out of the way. Queen 10 suited, jack 10 suited, 10 9 suited, even the low suited connectors, they're just not getting great implied odds if you make it 3 and they make it 12 or something like that. So you got to fold. It's annoying, I know, but remember, you're folding against your opponents in small stakes games because when they re-raise, they just have a really good hand. And if they have a really good hand, you're toast. Let's take a look at cutoff versus the small blind. This is when you're going to be in position against the 3-bet. Now you should call quite wide. Notice lots of suited aces, suited Broadway hands, suited connectors, all get in there. Offsuit hands, though, are still folding. A big mistake a lot of players make is they call every time with king, queen, ace, jack, king, jack, ace 10, offsuit, thinking, oh, it's a good, strong high card hand. But no. If your opponent is too tight and they are 3-betting you, these hands become really bad. And again, the suited Broadway hands that are very likely to be dominated, like king 10, ace 10, queen 10, etc., these are not good enough to call if the opponent's range is far too strong. Now, all this presumes the opponent's ranges are far too strong. If your opponent's ranges are far too loose, you should be defending at least with these hands in green and perhaps even wider, okay? If your opponents are too loose. But most players in small stakes games, when they 3-bet, they have a really strong range. They may play really loosely in general. They may call raises a lot. But when they 3-bet, most players are going to be weighted towards value. Let's talk about the bluffs. Let's take a look at this cutoff versus button range. Notice some 4-bet bluffs. So you raise cutoff, button 3-bets. 4-bet bluffs include ace 10 suited, ace 9 suited, ace 5 suited, ace 4 suited, king jack suited, king 10 suited, king 9 suited, and ace queen offsuit. These are hands that are 4-betting with the intention of folding if your opponent goes all in. Okay. If your opponent, though, is not 3-betting often enough to begin with, and it's with literally aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, ace, king, maybe ace, queen, well, now you don't want to bluff nearly this often at all. You may not want to bluff at all, period. Definitely the king X suited bluffs get way worse. You can probably still sneak in with a few of the ace X suited bluffs, but I don't think I would go for it with them all that often. I think it's fine just to let those hands go. I know it's annoying to let the hands go, but if your opponents have the nuts, you're in bad shape. Let's get out of the way. Also, you have to be careful loading it in with hands like jacks and 10s and queens. If your opponent's range is very strong, jacks and 10s and queens also don't get it in. Notice this low jack versus hijack range. So tight range against tight range. Notice queens and jacks just call and try to see the flop. They do not get it in. The only hands you're happy to get it in with against a tight range are literally aces, kings, and ace king. That's it. Because, well, those are the only hands that do well against a really strong range. Let's talk about post-flop exploits. Your opponent may or may not continuation bet too often. Some people do, some people don't. You need to pay attention to what they do. That said, when most players raise or check raise on the flop or the turn or the river, their ranges usually contain far too few bluffs. And that's especially true as more and more money goes in the pot, which is usually going to be the case on the turn and the river. So when you get raised after the flop, you should overfold. You should fold far more often than the GTO strategy recommends. Here we have a spot at 1-2 no limit hold'em. The hijack raises to $6. We call in the big blind with 5 of spades, 5 of hearts. The flop comes 9-6-4, 2 diamonds. We check. The pot's 13 and the opponent bets 12. And we know this player to be on the tighter side. When they bet, they usually like their hand. Well, in this scenario, you have to ask, how likely are we to improve on the turn? And the answer is not very often because we need a 5. We have another big problem here, and that is that the 5, if it's a diamond, could give the opponent a flush. And if it's the other 5, it could also give them the straight. And we could already be crushed by pocket 9s and pocket 6s if we do make a set. So this is already not a great spot. Also, we have our opponent betting big, 12 into 13. Now, I realize some players will continuation bet big in general in small stakes games, but a lot of players won't. A lot of players, if they don't bet very often, like say the opponent has jack 10 of clubs in the spot, They may just check it and lose the pot. So if your opponent's the type of player who, when they bet, either has a good made hand or a decent draw, like Jack 10 of diamonds for a flush draw, your hand is in awful shape, because if they have a better made hand than yours, which all made hands that they would bet big are better than yours, you're in awful shape. And if they have a draw, your opponent has pretty good equity. So this is a spot where you simply have to let it go. It may sound nitty to fold a pair, but when your opponent's blasting it and they're generally on the tighter side, it's not a good spot at all. Fold early if your opponent does not continuation bet often enough and they are generally weighted towards value. Let's take a look at another scenario. With King 9 of spades, we raise it up. Big blind calls. We raise it up under the gun +1. Flop comes King, Queen, 10, 2 clubs, 1 heart, big blind checks. This is a nice spot to make a continuation bet. The pot's $11. We go 8 on a board that should heavily favor our range. Opponent raises to 22. And we know this opponent doesn't really check raise unless they like their hand. What should we do with the King 9? We have a pair, top pair, and a gut shot straight draw. Take a second, think about it. Write in the comment section down below what you would do in this scenario. Do we fold, call, or bump it back up again? Well, in this scenario, you should actually just fold. And I think it's an easy fold. Why? Because when they raise, they like their hand. What are they going to like on King, Queen, 10? It's going to be 2 pairs and straights. I realize that they could have a whole lot of garbage in their range, but if you give your opponent Queen 8, they're not going to check raise you unless they're crazy. Now, if you're against a crazy person, you obviously can't fold this hand. But against most players who are tight and aggressive-ish, you just got to let it go. If we were playing against a good, strong, game theory optimal opponent who was playing perfectly, would you believe that King 9, King 8, Ace 10, 10 9, 10 8, pocket 8s, all of these actually mix between calling and folding. So against a good player who's very balanced, you should actually fold some portion of the time. But against a tight player, it becomes a trivially easy fold. So let it go. So there you have it. The #1 exploit to crush 1-2 live no limit hold'em cash game players. The exploit is to overfold whenever they want to put a lot of money in the pot. When they raise, or when they check raise, or when they 3-bet or 4-bet, they are far more likely to have the goods than they should in game theory optimal world. If your opponent's way too weighted towards value, you in turn drastically overfold. It's as simple as that. Thanks for watching. Good luck in your games, and I'll talk to you next time.